Hello, and welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and this is part 2 of our 2022 Year in Review. On part 1, we took a look at the first 25 episodes of 2022, and on part 2, you guessed it, we're going to look at the last 25 episodes of 2022. I want to say thank you to Hemp, Impactful Ventures, New Holland Agriculture, Amerishon Cast Hemp, King's Agri-Seeds, Westtown Bank, and the folks over there at iHemp Michigan. Really appreciate your help and your support, and we could not be doing this show without you. So thank you to our sponsors. And while I'm at it, I want to thank our listeners. I appreciate all of you out there being on this hemp journey with me. Okay, so let's get this going. I do admit though that this is a much bigger undertaking than I thought it would be, but I've really enjoyed going back and listening to the past shows, which is something I really don't do. Usually I interview the guest, I put the episode together, I publish it, and then I move on. I don't often look back and review the episodes. Maybe I should, but there's always something else to do. So anyway, this has been a fun exercise for me, and I hope you get something out of it too. So anyway, let's pick up with our review. We're going to look at episode 26, and this was with Bill Althouse. Do you remember Bill? This was actually, I think, my most controversial episode from 2022. Bill is clearly very knowledgeable. He's got a lot of experience, like a lifetime of experience in green building, in hemp, and all kinds of stuff. He believes that hemp has, great potential to change the world, but he cautions against that common rhetoric that hemp can magically fix all the world's problems. He says instead that the industry must focus on legitimization. And so in the interview with Bill, he sort of poked holes in things, or tried to anyway, one of which was hempcrete. He had some issues with hempcrete, but since then we had some people come back and kind of refute what he was talking about. So it's interesting, we've got controversy here. So anyway, here is Bill Althouse.
Well, hemp folks need to understand the mind of the target buyer. The target buyer in the industries, whether we're talking construction materials or textiles or, the long list of the 25,000 products that hemp people like to say we're going to make from hemp. Just go to those people in the industries that make the decisions about what material they use and be able to talk with them in a way that you can show you understand their needs and requirements and that you're willing to meet them.
On episode 27, we had 3 different guests. We heard from Bo Whitney, the economist, who was talking about this deliberate miseducation of lawmakers by big cannabis. It was causing an expensive headache in the fiber and grain sector because they're distorting the narrative around industrial hemp, confusing lawmakers, stifling competition, and he says it's costing the fiber and grain sector nearly $20 billion a year. I also talked to Eric Kleffner, a hemp grower and game developer who was working on a play-to-earn video game called Hemptopia, where players can earn cryptocurrency. Although with the current environment and conversation around cryptocurrency, I'm not sure you want to do that. Anyway, I talked to Rachel Berry on this episode too. She's a hemp farmer and founder of the Illinois Hemp Growers Association out there in Illinois. She's also involved with the U.S. Hemp Building Association. And here I was asking her about processing capacity coming online in Illinois.
Yeah, there are. Well, I think as you always know, there's always kind of whispers and plans in motion to get fiber growing. And I don't want to spill the beans on anybody here, but there seems to be some really good progress being made on, an Illinois-owned processor.
On episode 27, I talked to Chris Boucher. He's, one of the OGs of the hemp industry. He's been in this for like over 30 years. Back in the early 90s, he became friends with Jack Herer. At one point in the 90s, he planted legal hemp in California, like the USDA gave him permission, but then, like the state narcotic people came and shut him down. He's just got a ton of great stories, and it was an honor to have him on our show last summer.
My real roots in the beginning was I was in a store in Van Nuys, California, and I had been making cotton backpacks at the time, 1990, and a gentleman asked me to sign a hemp petition. And I did not know what hemp was. I said, "What is hemp?" And he turned around and said, "This is what hemp is. I'm an author of a book I wrote. We're trying to legalize hemp in California. I'd like your signature, and I can explain to you what hemp is." 6 hours later, I left the store. The guy's name was Jack Hara, and he took me through each chapter, and it basically changed my life. Everything
Wow.
I knew in school, pretty much, I want to say it was a lie, but they just took out all the information. So from that moment on, I was like, let's change the world. This is the greatest environmental product commodity, ever grown.
On episode 29, we talked to the folks from King's Agri-Seeds, Tim Fritz and Sarah Mitchell. Tim has been pioneering what he calls four crops, which is, what you plant in the field before you plant hemp. So he's got some interesting ideas there. And Sarah Mitchell, she's their hemp specialist there at King's Agri-Seeds. She's always great to talk to as well.
You know what? People are still interested in growing CBD. It has tapered off. We are just seeing a big uptick, though, in the grain and fiber side of things. So what's really interesting is that now the processors are beginning to come online in a more serious way. We're expecting that people should be practicing in order that in 2023, we've got a harvestable crop.
Hard to believe that 2023 actually starts in like a week. Also on that show, I talked to a woman by the name of Segway Fishlin. She's building a hempcrete house on the Puget Sound, working with Cameron McIntosh from Amerishon Cast Hemp. She had some concerns about the language we use when we talk about industrial hemp. Specifically, she was referring to the guests from 2 weeks before that, Bo Whitney and Eric Kleffner, the guy making the cryptocurrency game.
I found it interesting that I felt that some of what the first two speakers were talking about and their intentions seemed to be good, and that they really wanted to help grow the industrial hemp industry, because this is an industrial hemp podcast, but that some of their languaging seemed to be maybe either intentionally or unintentionally undermining the ultimate goal by using imprecise language in a way that could be damaging to the free growth of the industrial or maximum free growth of the industrial hemp industry.
She made a lot of good points. It was a really interesting conversation, and I recommend you go back and listen to that one again. Episode 30 was my review of a congressional hearing on hemp production. It was held by the House Agriculture Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research, and they were examining the USDA's hemp production program. And what I thought really interesting in that hearing is that the USDA was not present, neither was the FDA. But Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture Kate Greenberg was there. Commissioner of Agriculture from Kentucky, Ryan Quarles, was there. Lots of great people, lots of experts talking about the hemp program. Episode 31 was my visit to the Montana Hemp Summit. I took a trip out to Fort Benton, and I spent 2 days with, what Ken Elliott calls the movers and shakers of the fiber and grain industry. It was really informative, very intensive. There was just a lot of discussion and planning and just camaraderie amongst the hemp folks. So I spent a few days there in Montana and actually put the episode together there in the hotel room in Montana. Episode 32 was pretty much a complete departure from industrial hemp. I had the chance to talk to one of my own personal heroes, Sander Katz. I read a book by Sander Katz back in 2012 about fermentation. This was after I heard him on the radio. I'm a big fan of, NPR's Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and he was on that show 10 years ago talking about fermented foods, and that got me just down this whole other path about fermented food. So it was great to talk to Sander Katz.
The story of fermentation goes much further back than agriculture. And you know, I mean, so I mean, I would generally describe fermentation in a very general way as fermentation is the transformative action of microorganisms. If you were to ask a biologist what is fermentation, they'll give you a very, very different answer, which is that they'll tell you that fermentation is anaerobic metabolism, the production of energy without oxygen. And in this sense, you know, the earliest life forms that we believe emerged on the earth were all fermenting organisms. You know, when the earliest bacteria and archaea emerged, there wasn't oxygen in the environment, and they were anaerobic organisms. They were fermenting organisms. So you could argue that the earliest forms of life were fermenting organisms, and it was really fermenting organisms that sort of gave rise to multicellular forms of life, including plants and fungi and animals and human beings.
On episode 33, I talked to Freya Bartels from Hemp Cooperative Ireland, a group that is helping to facilitate the growth of the Irish hemp industry. She also talked about the 7 pillars of hemp, which the Hemp Cooperative Ireland developed as an educational framework. Those 7 pillars are personal well-being, food and beverage, carbon sequestration, rural regeneration, animal welfare, sustainable circular bioeconomy, and sustainable construction. So I thought that was a really helpful framework, really good educational tool. And for me, it was just great to hear about, the hemp space in Ireland, which it turns out it's not that different from the hemp space here in the US.
I think that's a big thing in Ireland, that it's seen as hippy-dippy, wacky tobacco kind of situation by a good few people, and they've got their heads screwed on right, and they're looking at it and thinking, what are you doing? And then you've got the other side of people who are like, oh my gosh, I'd love to try CBD, and yes, I'll wear those hemp shoes. So Ireland is a really cool place to be in right now. There's a lot of exciting people. People are very open.
On episode 34, I talked to the new leadership team at the U.S. Hemp Building Association, Henry Gage and Ryan Doherty. But since publishing that episode back in September, there's been another change in leadership there. Ryan is still the vice president of the USHBA, but the new president is Ray Catterley. I'm hoping to get Ray on the podcast in 2023. I met Ray a couple of years ago at a Hempcrete workshop up in Delaware Water Gap, of all places. On episode 35, I talked to Craig Carr from Carfields, which is a big agricultural company in New Zealand.
We need to make sure that we're growing a crop that is profitable for the farmer, because if the crop is not profitable or is not sustainably profitable, then we are not going to have that supply base in the future. And this is one of the big challenges I think the industry faces globally, is that we need to ensure that that all of the financial metrics go back and start with the farmer.
On episode 36, we talked about the USDA Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities program. The USDA had just released their list of recipients for, like $3 billion in funding. And there were a handful of hemp projects in that list. And some of the folks that I know are actually involved in those projects. So I talked to Greg Wilson at Hempwood.
The core principle of what we do is we have a sustainable base material, which is hemp stalks, and we use proteins from soy flour for our plant-based glue. In order to bond these together, we compress it into a log, and then we bake it in an oven like a loaf of bread, using our waste from the facility as our thermal energy in our bioburner, and using hydro for our electric, making the only carbon negative fluorine that's made in America that is certified by the USDA, as well as 3 nonpartisan certifying bodies for our life cycle analysis and environmental product declaration that have just been formally published by ASTM.
And I talked to cover crop coach Steve Groff, who gave me a quick science lesson in how tilling the soil adds to carbon in the atmosphere.
Carbon is carbon, And when you till the soil, you disturb it, and then it mixes with oxygen. Carbon mixing with oxygen is
carbon
CO2.
dioxide. There you go.
So it's not that hard to explain. And the thing of it is, you can't see it. It's a colorless gas, if you will. If you could imagine when you're, tilling fields like that, it would be dust clouds going up after your tillage equipment. That would be a picture you could have in your mind. That's what's happened to CO2, just going up into the sky again.
On episode 37, we talked to Nick Walters. He's from the National Hemp Growers Co-op. He's from down there in Mississippi, and the co-op just released a white paper about how hemp can be used as a source for renewable natural gas.
Each acre of hemp, if it's grown at like industrial hemp, not CBD, okay, but if it's grown under industrial hemp, gives off about 208 million BTUs per acre. So 1 acre is about 208 million BTUs. Well, what does that mean? If you converted that 1 acre then of that 208 million BTUs, and you converted it to electricity as comparable to the amount of energy that's coming out, okay, it's comparable to 60,000 kilowatts of electricity.
Also on episode 37, I caught up with Lori Daitner from Don Services in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where this year they finished work on the Project PA Hemp Home. This was proof of concept that you can take an old residential building, strip it down to studs, and completely renovate it using hempcrete to create an energy-efficient, healthy home. And while they used imported hemp for the hempcrete walls, they used locally grown hemp for hempwood flooring. It's very exciting, and I can easily picture a not-too-distant future where homes across the country are renovated with hemp. Here's Lori Daitner.
When we finally were able to invite Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture Russell Redding to come see the house, and he took his first step in, and I was able to say, "You're standing on Pennsylvania hemp." I got to tell you, that was really a moment. I mean, there were a lot of moments along this whole process, but that was really a moment.
On episode 38, we talked to the guys from Mariposa Technology who have this device that they call PAMAP. It stands for Predictive Analytical Modeling Application for Plants. And you can use it to zap your plants and find out what your THC levels are, your CBD levels, all that stuff. It's I think it's game-changing technology. I talked to John Roberts and Michael Dale Mole from Mariposa Technology, and here's John Roberts talking about the accuracy of the PAMAP device.
We can correlate the THC content of a bud to a leaf scan at 0.93%, 93% accuracy, which is really laboratory level type results, and also CBD and CBG at 0.9%. So, and we're continuing to work on this. So, and we've had it verified by an outside expert.
On episode 39, we talked about logistics with Kevin Schultz. He's from 357 Hemp Logistics.
We're not expecting to go into Montana and ship stuff down to a processor in Florida over and over again. That's just going to be unaffordable. So, we really want to see the supply chain succeed. So, anytime we can encourage farmers or processors to work closer together and take that leg of the transportation, we're fine with it. There's going to be plenty for us to do. We're really excited about industrial. For us, selfishly, there's going to be just more weight being moved around. There's just going to be much more product.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit easier to ship than the CBD because you're not dealing with the THC level, but there's still a level of care that goes into and a know-how to shipping hemp. And I believe that the supply chain ultimately wants to work with their peers in the industry. And we're slowly making our way through kind of those players in the industrial side and starting to work with more and more of them.
On episode 40, we talked to Shane Pritchard and Bill Brill from Hemp Processing Partners, a Colorado-based company that's focused on providing processing solutions for fiber grain and floral hemp production around the world. Here's Shane Pritchard.
We've developed a lot of good relationships. We now have a very solid handle on what can be done with today's current technology. We've become very aware of the differences in decortication technology and the pluses and minuses. And so at this point, I think that the industry is ready to take that next step. As soon as people really invest in hemp refining facilities, it's going to explode very quickly. Right now, that's the bottleneck. You have a lot of farmers that want to grow, but they really know there aren't a lot of processing centers to take it to.
On episode 40, I had the chance to talk to Dr. Heather Grab. She's a senior lecturer at Cornell University's School of Integrative Plant Science, where she focuses on hemp cultivation and processing. She told me a lot about the National Hemp Industry Needs Workshop that was coming up in November. And she also told me a bit about the Cornell Hemp program.
My job is, actually really full-time, just teaching courses that focus on best practices for hemp production. So I have a class I teach in the fall for about 25 students here at Cornell that focuses specifically on everything from cultivar selection through site selection, cultivation practices, harvest timing choices, all of that good stuff.
Oh, wow.
And then
in
the spring semester, I teach a class that has a whole lab component to it focused on the processing side, which is really critical to match that development, not only of the cultivation side, but also the knowledge and capacity for processing within the industry.
I am super excited that Cornell University has taken such a leading role in the hemp industry. And I am hoping to bring you more information about their program in the new year. On episode 42, I had the chance to talk to Ryan Quarles, Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Kentucky. It was a great interview. We talked about all kinds of things. And for him, one of the main stumbling blocks for the whole industry is the FDA's lack of guidance.
The number one impediment in hemp in America is the FDA. The FDA needs to do their job and give us guidelines on what their view is on the potential regulatory aspects of CBD and other cannabinoids.
Episode 43 was my recap of the Pennsylvania Hemp Summit. I was the MC of the Monday night reception, so I got to get up there on my soapbox and say a few words about the industry. Basically that we need common sense regulation and we need investment in the industry. And Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture, Russell Redding, he got up and he talked about the industry and also said some really nice things about Lancaster farming and the work we're doing here on the podcast. And then Ken Elliott from I&D Hemp in Montana, he was the keynote speaker. So that was super cool that I was able to help facilitate bringing Ken, the CEO of America's largest hemp company, to be the keynote speaker at the Pennsylvania Hemp Summit. Because look, Pennsylvania is poised to be a really big player in the space, but like I said, we need sensible regulation and we need investment specifically in the infrastructure for processing and supply chain development. Episode 44 was a history lesson with John Dvorak. He's a hemp historian who has been collecting archival material for decades now, and he keeps it at hempology.org.
We did grow hemp. They grew a lot of hemp down in Pennsylvania in the 1700s. But into the 1800s, there were a lot of other different fibers that were used for rope and cordage, like sisal from Mexico, jute from India and China, and Manila hemp from the Philippines. Imports of these fibers flooded into America during the 1800s. These fibers were a lot cheaper than hemp, so cannabis hemp producers couldn't compete with that. In addition, in Russia, they grew a lot of hemp in Russia, millions of acres, and they had done it for hundreds of years. So American farmers could not compete with Russian hemp. So they didn't grow it very much, especially into the 1800s.
So go back and listen to that one. He's got some neat historical facts that kind of challenge that existing, conspiracy theory that hemp was made illegal back in the 30s because big industry wanted it to go away. He also does some really neat educational outreach. He's got like a hemp curriculum that he takes around to colleges and things. So really psyched for the work that John is doing. All right, so on episode 45, we had another conversation with Morgan Tweet from the Hemp Feed Coalition, talking about, the pathway to getting hemp grain to be approved for animal feed.
Almost 99% of the time, AFCO follows FDA CBM's lead. There are other ways to get ingredients or formulas or products approved that are outside of AFCO. They go directly to FDA CBM. So those are your feed additive petitions, your GRAS petitions. And those are a little bit different. The reason HFC went with AFCO and doing the feed ingredient definition is because we believe that's the broadest approval method that will open up as many doors as possible for the industry as a whole.
So be sure to check out hempfeedcoalition.org for more information about the great work that they are doing there. On episode 46, we talked to Sarah Stevens, CEO of Midwest Hemp Technology, another processing center in Kansas. And I'm excited about this because I think we should grow as much hemp as possible in Kansas. And so now, as far as I know, there's Midwest Hemp Technology. There's the guys over there at Prairie Band Ag who are processing, and of course, South Bend Industrial Hemp. Do you know of other Kansas hemp processors? Let me know. Anyway, here's Sarah Stevens.
The first 2 years I grew in 2019 and 2020, but I was like everyone else focused on CBD. And so in 2021, we had 6 varieties of fiber and grain genetics. And New West Genetics was really the best producing of what we trialed, but also we had some different variations in the dates and the techniques and other things too. So there's a lot of factors that go into success. We've also always tried on dry land. We really are trying to make that work. And in some parts of the state, that works great. In other parts of the state, that's a no-go. Right. So lots to learn there. But this last season, we did just 2 varieties of New West Genetics, 2463 and 2370, and had good luck there. And they're bred in the Midwest. And, we tried Ukrainian seed and Canadian seed. And what we'd like to do is try some Kansas native seed, but the Kansas Department of Agriculture has a no-go on that. So
So yeah, it's my understanding that there are varieties of feral hemp all over the Midwest left over from the Hemp for Victory program in the 1940s. And I learned from John Dvorak, the historian, that the U.S. government tried to eradicate those feral varieties, but luckily they were unsuccessful. So states like Kansas, there are, wild varieties of hemp that they could sort of capitalize on. So I hope we can get to that point. All right, so we're coming down to some recent episodes here. So if this all sounds very familiar, it's because these episodes were just from a couple of weeks ago. But I did a special episode about that delegation of U.S. hemp industry people who went over to Thailand for the Asia International Hemp Expo. I talked to Morris Beagle, I talked to Mandy Kerr, and I talked to Greg Necco about their trip. I'll just play a little bit of Morris Beagle talking about the differences in Thailand's approach to cannabis.
They put out these initiatives that then become policy, and so they're really quite supportive of agriculture and small farmers, and they've laid out rules and regulations that are probably more beneficial to the hemp and cannabis space in Thailand than any other market in the country. All the people from the USA and Canada and Europe are like, God, I wish our regulations were like this.
On episode 48, which actually was just published last week, it was a conversation with Cameron McIntosh, the hempcrete builder here in Pennsylvania. We heard about the various projects that he's working on, heard about some plans for 2023. We talked about, the hempcrete construction being added to the residential building codes. And we also talked about the R value of hempcrete, which if you go back to the first guest I was talking about on this recap, that was what he had a big problem with around hempcrete, was their refusal to do this R value test. But Cameron talked about that, and it seems like everything's fine. All right, and then so finally, episode 49 was part 1 of this recap series. So indeed, I can review the review in the review. So this is episode 50. Congratulations, you made it to the end of season 2 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp podcast. I'm pretty sure that next year in 2023, we'll start season 3, and we will continue our discussion of industrial hemp. And I will be bringing in other things that aren't quite about hemp. So I hope you have an open mind to things. I'm sure you do. You wouldn't be involved in industrial hemp if you didn't have an open mind. So I appreciate that about you. I appreciate you, and I thank you for listening. And just a reminder on that part 1 of the recap, I talked about Tin Bird Shadow, right? That's the outfit that does the music here on the show. Well, surprise, surprise, it's just me. I've been making the music all along. I love that. I'm a creative person. I do all sorts of things besides make industrial hemp podcasts. And you can learn more about Tin Bird Shadow by going to patreon.com/tinbirdshadow. There's going to be all kinds of extra content there. I'm going to start a podcast that's not about industrial hemp that will be exclusive for members of the Tin Bird Shadow community. So I think some of you will enjoy that. All right, so I guess that brings us to the end. So I hope you have a wonderful holiday season with your family. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. We will see you in January. Probably going to come in, second or third week of the year with episode 1 of season 3. So again, my name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. We've got some cool stuff in store for you in 2023. Yeah, and I'm excited. I am super excited about the new year. I think everyone is. There's been a lot of talk that 2023 is the year that it's just going to happen. All right, so looking forward to that. All right, so be sure to check out lancasterfarming.com for all of your agricultural news needs. We've got lots of stuff there. It's not just about industrial hemp. We cover all of agriculture. So check it out online at lancasterfarming.com. And get yourself a subscription to our printed newspaper that comes out every Saturday. You will not regret it. It's literally the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. All right, until next time, I will see you in the newspaper. Season 2, Episode 50 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.
Industrial hemp.